So there's a king crouched in the shadows, standing outside of a cave, wearing a disguise like some biblical version of a mob boss that's meeting an informant. His hands are shaking, but not from cold, rather from the desperate kind of fear that makes you do things that you swore you'd never do. Inside that cave, there's a witch, the exact kind of person that this king made it illegal to consult, punishable by death. And in about 10 minutes, he's going to ask her to raise the dead. This isn't fantasy or folklore. This is 1 Samuel chapter 28. And what happens next is either the most supernatural encounter in the Bible or the most tragic case of a leader so desperate that he destroyed everything that he stood for in just one night. Either way, it's about to get really, really dark. I thought that I knew my lowest points of my addiction. Face down at 3 a.m. on my living room floor with a pounding headache, but still the only thing I wanted to do was drink. And I was wondering, is this rock bottom? But I've never been desperate enough to seek out the very thing that I once crusaded against. But King Saul was. And what happens that night outside the cave, outside of a village called Endor, it reveals something kind of terrifying about what fear can drive us to do. Because when God stops talking, we'll apparently listen to anybody who will continue talking, even the dead. You ever been in one of those moments when you're facing something so overwhelming that you start considering options that you once thought disgusting, when you're so desperate for answers that you're willing to compromise everything you've ever believed? I was thinking about that feeling when I was reading this story, because King Saul, the man God chose to be Israel's first king, is about to have the ultimate version of that exact moment. See, Saul had spent years cleaning up Israel's spiritual landscape. He'd driven out all of the mediums, the fortune tellers, and the spirit channelers, made it a capital offense to consult the dead, basically declared war on everything that was supernatural that wasn't directly from God. But now, the Philistines are massed for war. Their army is so massive that the text says seeing them made Saul's heart, quote, tremble greatly, end quote. And when the king of Israel tries to get guidance from God through dreams, through priests, or through prophets, he just gets nothing. Complete silence. All right, let's try and paint the picture like we were there, because for real, this is like a psychological thriller. See, Saul is standing on a hill, looking down at an army that could wipe out Israel completely off the map. He's desperate for any kind of divine guidance. So he goes through the proper channels first, going through what is basically Israel's spiritual magic 8-ball that priests used to get a yes or a no answer from God. And when he consulted these priests, still, he got nothing. So he sends for the prophets. These are the guys who usually can't shut up about messages from God, right? They come, they pray, they wait, nothing, silence. Saul himself tries to get prophetic dreams, spends the night seeking any kind of supernatural communication. Still, complete radio silence from heaven. Now, here's what makes this situation so psychologically brutal. See, Saul knows why God isn't talking to him, because earlier in his reign, he'd directly disobeyed God's command to completely destroy the Amalekites. Instead, he kept their king alive and saved the best livestock for himself. When the prophet Samuel confronted him about it, Saul tried to spin it as a religious devotion. Quote, "We were saving the best animals to sacrifice to God," end quote. Samuel's response was devastating. Quote, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings as much as obeying his voice? To obey is better than sacrifice, and the head is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry," end quote. Rough, right? Samuel basically told Saul that his disobedience was as bad as witchcraft. And then came the words that haunted Saul for years. Quote, "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king," end quote. So when Saul can't get God to answer him now, he knows exactly why. The silence, it's not mysterious. It's earned. God isn't ignoring him because of some cosmic mood. God's ignoring him because Saul chose rebellion over obedience. But here's where desperation overrides everything Saul once believed. Late at night, Saul turns to his servants and he says something that should have shocked them to their very core. Quote, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go and inquire of her." Think about this for a second. The king who made consulting mediums punishable by death is now asking his staff to help him find one. The man who spent years hunting down witches is now about to become their customer. His servants, and I love this detail, they don't even hesitate. They immediately say, hey, look, there is no one in Endor, which means that everybody knew where to find a medium when they needed one. Despite Saul's crackdown, despite the death penalty, despite years of persecution, there was still a witch operating in the shadows, because there's always someone willing to profit from desperate people's spiritual hunger. So Saul disguises himself. He changes clothes, he covers his face, takes a couple of trusted men and some snacks out into the middle of the night like he's conducting some covert military operation. Except instead of meeting with foreign spies, he's going to consult the exact kind of person he spent his career trying to eliminate. When they reach the medium's house, and this is where the story gets both a little hilarious and heartbreaking. She doesn't recognize the king of Israel standing in her own doorway. He says, consult a spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I name. And the woman looks at this disguised stranger and basically says, are you insane? Don't you know that Saul has cut off all mediums and spirits from the land? Why are you setting a trap for my life, right? A trap for my life to bring about my death. See, she's terrified that this is some sort of sting operation, that Saul's secret police are actually trying to catch her in the act so they can execute her. But Saul actually swears an oath, quote, as surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this, end quote. Let that sink in. The king who banned mediums is now swearing by God's name to protect one. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The woman finally agrees. She says, whom shall I bring up for you? And Saul says the name that changes everything. Bring up Samuel. Samuel, the prophet who anointed him king, the same Samuel who told him that God had rejected him, the Samuel who died knowing that Saul's reign was doomed. And here's where the story takes a turn from psychological drama to supernatural horror. The medium, she starts her ritual, probably expecting the usual tricks, voices, illusions, whatever spiritual theater that she normally performed for the desperate clients that she served. But then something happens that terrifies her more than getting caught by Saul's men. The text says that she saw Samuel and she screamed, not like a theatrical gasp, but a genuine scream of terror, because this wasn't supposed to actually work. See, this is what really got to me. The medium screams not because she's faking it. She's used to faking it. She screams because for the first time she's not. Quote, why have you deceived me? End quote. She shouts that at Saul. You are Saul. She's recognizing him, not from his disguise falling, but because what she's seeing is so supernaturally real that she suddenly knows this isn't some random desperate client. This is the king of Israel. And something far beyond her usual spiritual parlor tricks had just happened, and it was freaking her out. The dead prophet Samuel has actually shown up, and Samuel's not happy about being disturbed. Quote, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? End quote. Imagine that question. Saul's spirit is essentially saying, I was resting in peace, and you dragged me back to deal with your mess? Really? Saul pours out his desperation. He says, I am in great distress. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God's departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophet or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do. And Samuel's response, devastating. Quote, why do you consult me? Now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy, the Lord has done what he has predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to David because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites. The Lord has done this to you today. Then Saul delivers some words that turns this from a supernatural consultation into a death sentence. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Samuel just told Saul that he and his sons, they're going to be dead within 24 hours. Saul collapses, literally falls face down on the ground, overwhelmed with terror. He hasn't eaten all day because of stress, and now he's been told by a dead prophet that tomorrow's his last day alive. The witch, who started this evening afraid to play any part of it, afraid for her life, she now finds herself trying to comfort the king of Israel, who's now lying almost lifeless on her floor. Here's why this story haunted me. I recognized something in Saul's desperation. I've been places where I was so desperate for answers that I started considering sources I just once found repulsive. I know in my darkest of days, at the lowest of lows, there were always self-help or this therapist or this course or something that I was looking for to fix me, but to do it without me having to actually change anything that was fundamental. I never went through with any of them, but I understood the impulse. See, when you've burned bridges with everyone who might actually help you, when you've ignored all of the legitimate voices trying to guide you back to sanity, suddenly even illegitimate voices, they start sounding rational. Saul spent years disobeying God, dismissing prophets, and rejecting divine guidance. And when the consequences of those choices came crashing down, he tried to bypass the very God that he'd ignored by consulting someone who claimed to be a supernatural powerhouse, right? Someone who had access to supernatural ability. But here's what chills me about the story. The seance actually worked. Samuel actually appeared. The supernatural encounter Saul was seeking, it actually happened, even though it was the worst possible outcome for him. Because sometimes getting exactly what you've been desperately seeking reveals that what you really needed was to stop seeking and start surrendering. Saul got his supernatural consultation. He got his prophetic word. He got divine communication, and it destroyed him completely. The next day, exactly as Samuel prophesied, Saul and his sons died in battle against the Philistines. Saul, severely wounded, fell on his own sword rather than be captured alive. The king who started his reign, chosen by God, ended it consulting witches and committing suicide. Here's a question that's kept me up a night or two. Was God's silence punishment, or was it mercy? Because maybe when God stops answering, it's not because he's abandoned you. Maybe it's because the answer you're seeking, they aren't the ones that you need. Maybe the real tragedy of this story isn't that God wouldn't speak to Saul. Maybe it's that Saul wouldn't listen to what God had already said. Saul wanted supernatural guidance about the Philistines, but what he really needed was supernatural forgiveness for his rebellion. He wanted prophetic strategy for winning battles. What he needed was the humility to lose his pride. The witch gave him what he asked for. God's silence was trying to give him what he needed. Hey, my friend, I don't know what desperate question you may be carrying tonight, or what door you're tempted to knock on because the legitimate ones seem locked. What voice you're considering listening to because the right voices maybe have gone quiet. But maybe, just maybe, before you disguise yourself and sneak out into the darkness to consult sources that promised you answers, maybe try listening to the silence first. Because sometimes God's silence, it's not rejection. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you is getting exactly what you're asking for. Hey, my friend, I'm Adam with Faith Labs. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, seriously, thank you for hanging out for a few minutes. Make sure that you're subscribed or following the channel, because we do daily devotionals every day, and it's awesome to have you here. Can't wait to see you on tomorrow's devotional, and until then, onward, and God bless you.